Okay, this is chapter 1062, Adventure in the Land of Science. So this is going to be our first, full chapter actually in Egghead Island and meeting some of these new characters. So let's talk about it. So this week, the cover story actually is pretty important, unlike the last couple of weeks. So this one is meanwhile in Chocolate Town on Cacao Island, and the entire island is covered in ice. The entire island is frozen over. All of the people are frozen, all of the buildings are frozen, even the ground is frozen. This panel immediately made me think of Kuzan or Aokiji because he has the powers of the ice fruit, right? And so given the last time that we heard of him, we knew he had joined Blackbeard's crew, supposedly. I personally don't think he's actually in the crew. He's probably on some kind of either solo mission quest or has made contact with the revolutionaries or somebody else and has ulterior motives for doing this. I don't think it's purely just because he's given up. Another potential reason why Aokiji could be going on his own like this is because he wants to learn the true history of the world and make his decisions about where he stands after he learns the history and just how corrupt the world government actually is, which leads me to the next point, which makes me wonder who else is with him, because clearly he was one of the two figures at the beginning of the cover story series, right? Why are they here and what are they looking for, specifically in Cacao Island in Chocolate Town? They could be going after the road poneglyph because Big Mom does have that in this territory. However, why would Oda show us specifically Chocolate Town if they weren't going after Pudding? If you remember back on Whole Cake Island when we were first introduced to Pudding and we learned that she was a member of the Three-Eyed People, or the Three-Eyed Tribe, which Big Mom tells us that when they awaken their powers, they are actually able to use the voice of all things, which could enable them to read the poneglyphs. However, it's not clear if the voice of all things is stronger in this group of people, or if it's the same as how Roger used it. Probably we'll be seeing more of this tribe and learning more about them as we're closing in the final saga and starting to wrap up all these pieces that we've been given for a while. I don't see any other reason why Blackbeard would be sending somebody into Chocolate Town specifically. Oda is usually very deliberate with placements of these kind of things, so I think if it was just going into Big Mom's territory to get the poneglyph, he would have just shown us them getting the poneglyph, and the fact that he's showing us Chocolate Town specifically tells me there is an intended target in Chocolate Town. So I guess we'll have to find out, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Now we're getting into the actual story. And we open up picking up with the Straw Hats that are not Luffy's group, we're in Franky's group, right? And it's just kind of this interaction between this person calling themselves Dr. Vegapunk and then the 7 Straw Hats that are here. So of course Franky is absolutely fanboying out here and he's so excited to see Dr. Vegapunk, and he's telling Vegapunk like, oh my god, you're my role model, I spent 2 years in your hometown Baltimore and I was going through your lab and there's so much stuff, I didn't even get to go through it all, that's how much stuff is there, oh my god, you're so awesome, this mech is so cool, oh my god, there's so many cool stuff, oh, I have so much I want to share with you, and he's just kind of going off on a tangent, right? And then we have Usopp also kind of getting really excited about the giant mech and the giant robot. And it's like, oh my god, I can't wait to show Luffy and Chopper, this is so cool. And Sanji is being Sanji, immediately thinking, oh my god, beautiful woman, there's a beautiful woman in front of me. And of course, Robin is the adult here and is thinking the same things that we were all thinking last week when the other chapter came out, or sorry, 2 weeks ago when the other chapter came out, right, 1061, when this person, who is a woman, says, I'm Dr. Vegapunk. And she says that, Something does not seem right here. Since when is Dr. Vegapunk a woman? I've only ever heard him being referred to as a man. Plus, this girl is super young. Dr. Vegapunk has been around for a while. How is this possibly Dr. Vegapunk? And this person confirms that this is not the main Stella body, so I guess the Stella body is the old man. And she says, you're looking at Punk 02, Vegapunk Lilith, which means there are a bunch of bodies. It's kind of like the Nagato pain thing where he has all the pains, except they seem to be very independent and not necessarily all kind of from a hive mind. And this person who has now said her name is Lilith explains that the research funds are kind of running low, so she's gonna rob them and take all their valuables. And Nami's like, what the hell? Like, it's freezing here now. You gotta be cold too? Like, come on, you just fished us out and this is how you're rescuing us? Like, really? And Lilith, it's like, this isn't a rescue. And there's like, if you look around, there's all these sea beasts, all these mechanical sea beasts that I made. Like, if I drop you or I tell them to, they will kill you all in an instant. And then we pan and we see all of these different mechanical beasts. Some of them look like some of the sea beasts that we've seen before. So there's like a giraffe, there's a reindeer, like a wolf, some kind of a lion thing, and some other ones that I can't really tell what they all are, but there's a lot of them. Like, the entire ship is surrounded by these gigantic sea beasts. And then Lilith gets some kind of a call on the receptor on her head, saying like, what are you doing? Like, why are you always looting? Like, have some pride. And she's arguing, and this person on the other line is Shaka, which we learn in a little bit is another one of the Vegapunk clone things. And he's explaining, or she's explaining, they're the Straw Hats, they're an Emperor crew, like, they're not gonna surrender, like, you have no idea what you just got yourself into. And Lilith's like, oh, that means they have more money. And Shaka is trying to explain that, no, you have no idea what you got yourself into. That swordsman over there, that dude has a 1.1 billion bounty. Like, he is terrifying. That's Rono Zora. He will kill you in an instant. He has you in his line of sight. If he takes one slice at you, he will cut you up and kill you. And then, look over there. You see that woman? That's Nika Robin. She's also ready to fight too. She's another one that is super scary. Like, this is a bad idea. Like, what are you getting yourself into? Like, you just walked right into this situation and now you're kind of gonna get trapped. And then Zoro specifically says, hey Vegapunk, there's something I want from you, so you'd better play nice. Got it? What I think Zoro is trying to talk to Vegapunk about is the smile fruit. Zoro had a really, really strong reaction to Ebisu Town and just how absolutely messed up that whole situation is and how these people cannot actually have their own emotions back. And I think that Zoro wants to ask Vegapunk if there's any way that he can reverse the effects of the smile fruit, since they're all aware at this point that Vegapunk has done a lot of research into devil fruits and the lineage factor. So I'm pretty sure that that's what Zoro's going to ask Vegapunk about, but I could be wrong, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking right now. And the last thing we see from this scene is the logic Vegapunk, which is Punk 1 Shaka, on the snail or communication device saying, no matter, bring them here, I have an interest in that crew. So he has something he wants to discuss with them as well. Maybe it has to do with Luffy's fruit. Maybe Vegapunk knows about the Nika model. Maybe he just is interested in them in general and finds their whole, like, crew to be kind of interesting. Maybe he's seen Franky. Maybe he saw Chopper and thought that they were interesting and wanted to study them. But I'm sure we'll be finding out within the next couple of chapters anyway, so who knows? Now we pan back to Luffy's group, which is Luffy, Chopper, Jinbei, and Bonnie. And Luffy is asking, like, oh, you've been here before? And Bonnie is explaining that she was here when she was a little kid, but it was still a pretty standard small lab at the time. And she says that she's coming back because she wants answers, and she wants to kill him if he doesn't say something that she approves of. And she says, Vegapunk's the one who turned my dad into a cyborg. And this is where we get the reveal that Bonnie is Bartholomew Kuma's daughter. So I think that pretty much rules out the theory that Bonnie is actually like a lot older, because if Kuma's her dad, and we can probably place Kuma in his 40s or 50s, so Bonnie being in her 20s in the form that she's currently in probably makes sense, right? Probably makes sense. Luffy, who clearly doesn't know that she's talking about Kuma or really understands the situation, he probably thinks, like, ooh, cyborg, Franky's a cyborg. I bet he made him a cool cyborg like Franky. And Bonnie, who is like in literal tears thinking about it, is like, no, it's not. It's no. Like, he lost who he is, he doesn't know who he is, he has no sense of his self, and he's a living weapon now. And then we see her thinking, and it's, of course, Kuma, right? And Jinbei's reaction kind of tells me that he's pieced together who Bonnie's talking about, because he looks very serious and is like, that's awful, it's unforgivable. And Luffy apologizes, calling her Bogey again, because Luffy is terrible at names. And she's like, it's Bonnie. He's like, oh yeah, Bonnie. So now they're going down into this pipe, and then they open up into the laboratory, and Luffy is like, ooh, I want some food, I'm hungry. And then he sees the robots and has that like twinkle in his eyes that we see every time the boys always see robots. And Bonnie is now thinking to herself, like, oh, I also meant to tell him that I ran into Sabo at Marijwa. Whatever, I'll just tell him later, right? And then we get to this really cool panel of Vegapunk's laboratory, and it's like all different kinds of mechanical stuff, all these robots, all these funky looking creatures, and the whole thing just looks very sci-fi. And they're just kind of admiring everything going on, and Luffy sees this dragon looking guy, or some kind of weird creature, and tries to ride it, tries to eat him, but it turns out that it was actually a hologram, and so Luffy just kind of fell through it. And then he sees all this delicious looking food, looks like a giant ice cream sundae, and he is so hungry, and Luffy, Bonnie, and Chopper are all immediately running towards it, and it is also a hologram, and so none of them can eat it. So Luffy is a little ticked off that he can't eat it and gets kind of mad, and Bonnie tries to explain to him, it's a 3D image like in science fiction and comics and stuff. And then they find this like fancy machine that can make food. It has like different pictures of different food items on it, and you just press the buttons and it makes them food. While they're trying to finagle with the machines and whatnot, this like Todoroki hair looking punk, one of the Vegapunk punks, actually explains that this is a winter island, but the environment is set to tropical mode in here, which confirms that the research that Vegapunk was trying to do back in Baltimore was something that he ended up accomplishing, so he can actually use the machine that he created to change the climate within an environment. I guess it would have to be closed off like Egghead Island is. And apparently Luffy describes this Vegapunk punk as being as big as Kaido, and is like, oh, you're a hollow thing too, right? And they punch him square in the face, and then he gets punched into the food machine, and we can confirm that this machine actually does in fact make food, and they're all eating the food, and it's kind of cool. You can tell Oda really had fun with this chapter and is probably gonna have a really fun time with all the sci-fi stuff he gets to write now. And Luffy and Bonnie are like super excited eating the food, and Punk 2, who we learn later their name is Atlas. Atlas is like, well, at least you appreciate my work on that unmanned cooking device, and is getting frustrated because there's not a ton of competent engineers that can recreate it, so he can't have like bunches and bunches and bunches of it because his blueprints can't be followed because they're probably super complicated and something only Vegapunk or somebody as smart as Vegapunk could understand. And then this little Atlas Vegapunk punches that hollow dragon somehow, which is kind of confusing. And then Vegapunk Atlas kind of goes off on a little tangent about what makes something real? Are hollows real? What even determines something being real? The age-old question. And they're like, well, what are you? And then Atlas confirms, me, just your resident scientific genius for hire, Dr. Vegapunk. And then it says Dr. Vegapunk, Atlas, which I guess each of them has a different trait. So this one is Wrath. And Luffy's eyes bug out and Chopper's eyes bug out. You're Vegapunk? I've heard that name. Kobe told me about you. And Bonnie's thinking, what the hell? That's a total lie. You're not Dr. Vegapunk. I've met Dr. Vegapunk. And you are not Dr. Vegapunk. So now we pan to another scene, and we are in the New World, somewhere on the ocean, in a world government ship. Inside of the ship, we see some of the members of CP0. We see Rob Lucci, we see Stussy, and we see Kaku. And they're talking about Vegapunk, and Kaku is explaining to Lucci that Vegapunk is like such a genius, but you know, he's always busy, and being one person, there's never enough time. So he says, you know how the expression you're as busy as a beaver? Well, what if you had more than one beaver? So his idea was to split himself into 6 people. So Kaku goes on to explain that Vegapunk has these 6 satellites, and they're also all Dr. Vegapunk. And Lucci is like, I'm the weird one for thinking that sounds impossible. Geniuses are such a pain. And if you look on here, we have Dr. Vegapunk as the Stella body, and then we have punks 1 through 6. So we have the logic one, which is Shaka, which we saw in the receiver. Lilith is the evil one. Edison is the flare one. Pythagoras is the wisdom one. And Yoke is the desire one. And Atlas is the wrath. So we've met Wrath, Evil, Logic. The other 3 Vegapunks we have not actually met yet. So in the background of the next panel, we can see a Seraphim version of Bartholomew Kuma. And Lucci is explaining what their mission is. He says that they're supposed to take this problem child, Seraphim, back to Egghead. And while we're there, take care not to damage any of the assets in the lab, but we're to take out every last Vegapunk, even though Vegapunk is the single most useful man in the world. And he's thinking that this probably has something to do with the Leloucia incident, which I think is important to note because that means that taking Leloucia off of the map did not erase it from everybody's memories. Everybody should still have memories of Leloucia. And then Stussy says that, you know, somebody with instincts like yours should know better than to question these things. And Kaku's also saying, like, we don't want to get in trouble, Lucci, like, just leave it. And that's where we leave this chapter. So, we know that the world government, probably specifically the Gorosei and Eam, no longer want Dr. Vegapunk alive. That means that he has a lot of information that they're afraid of getting out, and the incident with Sabo probably really freaked them out. The fact that people were going to find out about Eam and Eam's existence, and the fact that there's actually somebody above the nobles who are supposedly meeting at the Reverie to determine all of the things in the world and how it functions. And that means that Vegapunk probably has some idea about some of the stuff that the Gorosei are trying to cover up, right? We know that Vegapunk has researched the lineage factor, he knows how devil fruits work, he knows how the lineage factor works, he knows about the Lunarian race, because we can only assume that all of the research he did on King and any of the other Lunarians that the world government had captured probably gave him a lot of information that he really shouldn't know, but his research and his ability to make these weapons to control all of the people, they needed to keep him alive long enough to make all these weapons, and now that they've gotten these weapons created, they think that they can take him out, and probably they want to take him out before he spills the beans on anything. They're also probably very wary of him because of Bartholomew Kuma and what happened with him disobeying, right? There's no way that they weren't aware of him protecting the Straw Hat ship because he was gone for a while, and that had to be kind of suspicious seeing how they've gotten him in their possession again. They had to have known there was a gap where he mysteriously disappeared, and the only person in question who would have been responsible for that would have been Vegapunk. So I'm sure he's been on their radar for a while as a potential threat, and now the Gorosei are probably shitting bricks, thinking like, oh my god, like a lot of this stuff might get out. Like the whole thing with Soppa was a close call. We need to take this dude out. So that's kind of all I have to say for now. Thank you for listening if you did. If you want to discuss anything, feel free to comment below. That's about it. Bye.